to another Movie Macabre Monday. Now, I know it's been a little late for this review to get up. Again, if you guys don't know what I'm going to be reviewing today, it is, of course, The Bride of Frankenstein, the sequel to the Frankenstein movie from 1931, starring Boris Karloff. So without further ado, let's actually get into a movie review, shall we? So Bride of Frankenstein basically takes place right after the first one. Essentially, basically 4 years after the first movie came out in theaters. Of course, the first Frankenstein film was such a huge success, so obviously Universal at the time wanted to cash in on its success. And of course, you got all the old cast return. Well, not really the old cast, but some of the original actors from the first one, mainly Colin Clive, Boris Karloff, and that's pretty much it. Elizabeth has been replaced with another actress who I can't remember her name. I'll probably post it somewhere in this video. So she's been replaced, and pretty much it's just new actors from there. Now, this film has always been considered a very classic film and very highly regarded in the Universal Monster series. And plus, it actually takes place after the first one, mainly because, it's just a true to form sequel, unlike the other Universal Monster series of all the others, like Dracula, the Wolfman, etc. Well, maybe not the Wolfman, but you know what I mean. It's a true to form sequel in which Bride of Frankenstein literally takes place after the first movie. And what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, before we actually get into review of the movie, there's actually something different in the Bride of Frankenstein in the main opening. In the main opening, we are joined in a very cool little panoramic shot closing in to a castle. Now, this is not Frankenstein's castle. This is, of course, Mary Shelley's castle. And you're probably scratching your head, why do I say Mary Shelley? Well, in the opening scene, it's actually kind of a neat little opening that James Whale did for this production of the film. Main actress who plays also the monster, spoiler alert, is also played by Mary Shelley, who is also, the actress who plays Mary Shelley, I should say. And the actress name is none other than Eliza Lancaster, who, as I said before, probably already gave it out, but also plays the Bride of Frankenstein, or Frankenstein's Bride, or whoever you want to call it. It's actually quite interesting how they open up, because it's joined by essentially Mary Shelley's personal history, essentially, where she is just finishing up her Frankenstein novel, the famous novel that the films are based on. Well, mainly the first movie, but you know what I mean. Mainly, she essentially tells basically the last act of the first movie of Frankenstein, and essentially that's just a recap of it all. So basically, Eliza Lancaster plays Mary Shelley, and essentially she's just recapping what happened in the first movie, mainly the last act of the first film. And of course, it's, at the main part of the end of the climax of the film with the windmill scene. So we go to the windmill scene, and of course, the villagers are gathering around to see if Frankenstein monster is actually dead. And one of the villagers, who is actually quite well known in all the Universal Monster movies, her name's Millie, I believe. Sorry, not Millie, Minnie. My bad, I just forgot her name. But one of the villagers, who is called Minnie, is of course a comedic relief in this movie, and she is played by none other than the terrific actress Una O'Connor. And that name might be familiar for some Universal Monster fans, because Una O'Connor, now that name might be familiar to some of Universal Monster fans out there, because Una O'Connor is actually been one of the actresses in another previous James Whale production, mainly The Invisible Man, the first one, that is. And she plays kind of the constable's wife, another comedic relief. Just a fantastic, funny actress. She's just hilarious in this movie. Just has one of the great lines in it, and just plays a real klutzy kind of villager, type thing. So anyways, as the villagers are gathering around, of course, they're all wondering what happened to the Frankenstein monster, if he's dead, if he's alive. And Minnie, of course, is gossiping about the whole thing. We actually, one of the villagers, who was actually actors changed, but he was actually one of the main things in the first movie, as I mentioned, the father that had that girl drown in the first one, whose name is Hans, which I forgot about that. Again, it's been a while, guys, so I'm just going off by memory's sake. But Hans, whose daughter got killed by the monster in the first one, wants to see the monster, to see if the monster's actually alive, dead or alive or not. So based on this little quest he's on, he accidentally falls into the pit. And from there, you get a nice close up of Boris Karloff again, returning as a monster and the whole underwater pit. And just fantastic makeup job once again by then Jack Pierce once again. Again, they essentially use the same makeup as they did with the first one, but this one kind of Boris Karloff's hair, and from the hair down, he's essentially all burnt and scalding. All flesh is kind of burned. It's not really as graphic as I'm saying it is. I'll throw up an image right here so you guys can have a nice close-up look. But there you go, a nice little makeup job done by Jack Pierce, and it's just phenomenal. Very good makeup job once again. Plus, you also get the nice little look upon his little head staples where Dr. Frankenstein was operating on the dead body in the first one. So kind of nice symmetry right there, taking next step in the makeup evolution. So as I was saying, Hans, who was from the first movie, sees a monster and trying to struggle to get away. The monster comes up behind him and strangles him to death and leaving him in the pit. So the monster reluctantly tries to escape. He escapes, sees his wife, and essentially throws his wife, in the pit where Hans was. And then you get another great moment it's actually quite hilarious. There's a lot of funny scenes in this movie. The monster sneaks up behind Minnie and she just lets out a shriek and she starts yelling and screaming in terror. So a few minutes later, after Minnie starts screaming and yelling, the next scene picks up where Henry Frankenstein, who once again is played by the brilliant Colin Clive, is still resting from the first encounter of the monster from the last movie. And also, kind of interesting fact too, we also see Elizabeth in this movie, who is played by a different actress, who last time was played by Mae Clarke from the first movie. So yeah, a bit of recasting there, as I mentioned. So overall, I think that Valerie Hobson does a good job as Elizabeth overall, even though not as quite good as Mae Clarke, to be honest. That's just my personal opinion, though. So a few minutes later, after we get a brief glimpse at Henry and Elizabeth once again, Minnie comes around and warns about the monster once again coming back alive. And of course, after Henry wakes from his unconscious state, he starts obsessing about the monster again and wants to do further creations down the road on the monster. And there's this great scene of the arrival of, one of the more memorable characters in this movie, Dr. Parnassus, who is played by Ernest Theisinger. Again, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but you know who it is. He's a well-known actor and probably one of the most well-known characters in this movie. Essentially, when he arrives, he's actually one of Dr. Henry Frankenstein's old friends / roommates from back in the day, an old mentor basically. And essentially, he tries to bribe Henry Frankenstein into creating another creation for his, life after death experiment he worked on from back in the day. So during that, they essentially go on a little, Dr. Henry Frankenstein and Dr. Proterius start to, go to his lab and see what Dr. Proterius is curious about and wants Dr. Henry Frankenstein to work on his creation with him. And there's a great scene in this too where Dr. Proterius is showing all his lab equipment. Again, this great set design as well in the sequel from the last Frankenstein movie. They really went above and beyond with this sequel because they actually did a lot of more set design, cool little lab techniques, etc. But there's a great little scene there where Dr. Proterius is showing his, experiments, and one of them is this little glass bottle collection, and they have little people in them. It's just a cool visual effect, which to this day I do not know how they'd been able to do it, because this was of course back in 1935 where CGI and computers weren't around yet, and this really cool visual effect of these actors miniaturized in these glass bottles. Again, I do not know how they did it for 1935, but it's a very cool effect, and it's actually kind of neat. It's actually pre-CGI days, which is pretty impressive for 1935, before computers and all that. So as that experiment plays out, of course, Dr. Proterius is talking to Dr. Henry Frankenstein about creating the mate for the monster. And this is where this of course, Dr. Henry Frankenstein agrees to it. And of course, this is where that famous line is delivered from back in the day, as Dr. Peterius toasts to Dr. Henry Frankenstein on agreeing to create a mate for the monster to a new world of gods and monsters. So that was it of the second part of the movie. Now we get into the third act, well, essentially to near to the third act, but once the Frankenstein monster escapes, he's kind of moseying along in this forest area where he was previously from the windmill scene. So he moses along, and he's actually sees none other than a old blind shepherd in this, abandoned cabin. Now, I've significantly put emphasis on this scene because of the fact this part of the scene is actually what plays out in the book. Now, in the original book, Frankenstein monster is actually roaming around the same part, and he comes across an old. He doesn't really meet the shepherd or talk to him. He essentially hides out, and that's you get a lot of emphasis in the book about that and how he socializes with this old shepherd and talks to him about stuff, and that's how he develops his speech is through him and all that. That's actually what plays out in the book. In the movie, however, it plays out pretty much the same as the book, also in the original Mary Shelley book, just kind of different and not as complicated, I should say. They kind of get to the point. Plus, they had a family in the book. The old shepherd in the book had a family or something like that, and they die in the book, and it's just kind of gets kind of dark and complicated in the book. But in the movie, they kind of just keep it short and sweet and just have it just nice little scene between to give the monster kind of some humanity in the movie and etc. It's actually a very nice scene. It's actually quite a nice scene too, because the hermit and the monster actually have a nice touching moment. They actually one of the scenes too is just a fantastic acting job by Boris Karloff. The shepherd gives him wine, and he says wine, etc., developing his speech and all that. And of course, one of the famous lines from Boris Karloff as they're having a nice little tender moment there. He said Frankenstein, and while the hermit says that he's his friend, he says friend, good, and all that. It's just a very touching scene and very nice scene in the movie. Of course, one of the things I forgot to mention a few moments before when the Frankenstein monster meets the hermit in the forest, he actually stumbles upon a woman that tries to save a woman that was drowning. Of course, she sees the monster and is screaming because of the fact of what he looks like and this, monster decaying corpse and all that. And of course, two hunters heard about it and tried to track the monster down. So a few minutes later, the hunters break into the old man's cabin and see the monsters there. And unfortunately, poor old Frankenstein's monster has to accidentally burns down the cabin where the old man was, and essentially chaos ensues from there. And accidentally burns down the cabin where the hermit was, which is actually quite a sad scene in the movie. And because of that chaos breaking out, an angry mob starts to track down the monster, and while the monster manages to escape and finds nearby, crypt area of the town. And from there, he sees another man in the crypt area who is none other than Preterius, who once again is trying to build his creation for the bride of Frankenstein. And of course, we're joined by Dwight Fry again, who plays another henchman. And shockingly enough, he doesn't play another hunchback henchman. He plays a different type of, henchman type, who's called Carl in this. And of course, Ludwig, who is played by another Ted Billings. And as the henchmen depart to pick up more bodies, Preterius stays and enjoys a nice supper, eating and drinking wine near one of the grave coffins. And from there, there's a nice scene in there where it's a nice bit of dialogue between Preterius and the Frankenstein monster about creating a mate for him. And there's quite nice dialogue in there too. There's quite funny dialogue scenes. I can't remember one of the lines, but there's a nice little humor between Preterius and the Frankenstein little dialogue session there. They essentially team up to essentially take care of business, essentially. What that business is of course, once Henry and Elizabeth start to get married, and Henry Frankenstein earlier on refused to do the monster, and essentially Preterius is angry with that. And of course, Preterius is trying to demand that Henry Frankenstein builds the monster. Of course, it doesn't go as well. So he brings in Frankenstein as essentially his main, bodyguard muscle to make him do his bidding. Of course, Henry refuses once again, even though monster's there, and they kidnap Elizabeth. So Dr. Henry Frankenstein has no other choice but to actually join Pretorius in his little, monster experiment to build the Bride of Frankenstein. Which is actually kind of significant because in the book, it does play out somewhere similar, but in the book, Elizabeth dies somewhere between the end of the book, and essentially the Frankenstein monster, who becomes intelligent in the book, wants Dr. Frankenstein to create a mate for him. So again, Dr. Pretorius is not a creation in the book. It's just completely in the movie. And from there, in the next act, we actually see the creation of the Bride of Frankenstein. And once again, spectacular effects, well, not for makeup effects, but practical effects in the lab, because you see, once again, it's just, as a sequel goes, sometimes it's bigger, better, badder, just amazing practical effects in this one. You see sparks flying when the Frankenstein monster is, not the Frankenstein monster, but the Bride of Frankenstein is getting created. See it, lightning strike, you see explosions happening. There's a spectacular, very visual scene in the lab, and just fantastic lab equipment going on. And of course, as the storm, classic case scenario from the first one, as the storm slows down and the lightning stops, they lower the body of the Bride of Frankenstein, and that's when you get that classic line again. This time it's not he's alive, it's alive, it's alive. It's she's alive, delivered once again by Colin Clive. And that's one of the best scenes in the movie, as the monster is revived. They remove the bandages from the monster, and you just see, these beautiful eyes peeking through from the body of the bandages as they removed it, and you just see the monster, the Bride of Frankenstein's monster, rise up and closes in at the camera. Just a fantastic scene as well that plays out in the next part. And of course, you get another great line that is delivered by Dr. Pretorius, who says, "The Bride of Frankenstein." You get the nice little orchestral music going on. Just a fantastic moving scene in that one. Just fantastic scene. Just love it. Love it. Just amazing scene. So as the scene plays out, Frankenstein earlier on, I forgot to mention this, kills one of the assistants on the rooftop where the experiment is happening. He strangles him. Carl, who's played by Dwight Fry, dies during the lightning strike of and he goes to see the eventual creation of the bride, his mate, and it doesn't go too well. Poor Frankie, the monster Frankenstein. I'm not gonna say, not actual Frankenstein, but the monster Frankenstein, sadly gets rejected when he just says friend, and the Bride of Frankenstein starts screaming because of her disgust of it. That's when the Frankenstein monster delivers another classic line: "She hates me just like the others," and just goes berserk in the lab. As Elizabeth sees Henry Frankenstein, she races to, escape from the laboratory as it's crumbling down from the Frankenstein's monster's destruction. This a classic line by Boris Karloff, delivered once again. He says that famous line that everybody knows from this movie: "Yes, go live." And then they leave. And then once they leave, he says to Pretorius and the bride, "You stay. We belong dead." And that's when he pulls the switch and the whole castle crumbles. I should also say that once he delivers that line, great acting by Eliza Lanchester. Once Boris Karloff delivers that famous line, she just gives out this, wicked hiss throughout it, and it's actually kind of ironic because the main origin for that, reason why she did that was because when she was in England, she remembered when she was a kid about geese hissing. So that's apparently why she did that whole hiss thing at the whole end of the movie, the whole climax. And that's when, as I said before, the destruction of the tower and the laboratory of Dr. Pretorius's lab is destroyed, and that's the end of Bride of Frankenstein. Now, with that lengthy movie talk session about it, you're probably wondering, what did I think of the movie? And quite honestly, this is just my honest review of it, I actually really enjoyed it. This is actually my first time watching Bride of Frankenstein, and I gotta say, it's still one of the best probably one of the best Universal monster movies of all time, and is definitely, you know, worth of all the praise it gets. Just a spectacular movie with lots of, you know, bigger, badder special effects and just fantastic. And just once again a really good sequel. So in case you're wondering what would I give this movie, of course I'm gonna give it a fantastic rating, which is essentially 5 out of 5. Again, it's well deserving because let's be honest here, Bride of Frankenstein is probably one of the best movies out of the Frankenstein movie series and probably out of the whole Universal monster stock, and deserves all the praise it gets. I mean, just a fantastic movie overall. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I do apologize if it's been late. Again, like I said before, I've just been busy. So hopefully next week I'll do Son of Frankenstein for you guys. And if you guys enjoyed this video, give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe down below and comment down below if you like this video, and just generally subscribe to me if you want to watch more content from me, hopefully in the next coming months if I don't, you know, procrastinate too long. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me to now. So if you guys enjoyed this video, again, just stay tuned as always and have yourself a good day.